is going to be an interview with Bea Hines. We are so thrilled to have you here. Bea was going to be one of our speakers about a year ago during the pandemic. We had some Zoom challenges, so here we are. And we're so happy to have you, especially in honor of Black History Month. And so we are going to have a very interesting conversation today about all kinds of things. So I'm going to just let it roll. But thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Karen. It's always such a pleasure to be working with you and the JCC and the JCC staff. And thank you for those of you who are in the audience, and thank you for those of you who are out there virtually watching our program today. Basically, I can't tell you. I know you hear people say this a lot, but I really mean this, how terribly honored I am to be interviewing my dear, dear friend, Bea Hines. Bea and I met years ago. I have no idea when. All I know is that one day I picked up the neighbors in the Miami Herald, and there was an article about me saying the wonderful Dr. Miriam Klein Kassenoff, and I thought, oh my gosh, who is this woman that's writing these wonderful things about me? So I started an email correspondence with her, and then I invited her to speak at my Holocaust Teacher Institute that I founded at the University of Miami, and she came. And then whenever there's a story about our Jewish community that's relevant and important, whether it's reminding the community about Kristallnacht or Yom HaShoah, Bea is right there. She writes a beautiful column for us. So I'm wondering, is there a little Jewish blood maybe?
Could be. I wouldn't doubt it.
So through the years, we have become very close friends. We email a lot. And today, I thought that we would get right to it.
Okay.
We have some very important issues to discuss for Black History Month and also for the Jewish community with what's going on out there. So I have a 2-page bio.
Please don't read all of that.
But I think what I'll do is just say right now that journalist Bea Hines was born in Williston, Florida, and at a young age she moved with her mother to Miami. She graduated from Booker T. Washington High School. She was hired as the first African-American woman to be on staff at the Miami Herald. She has won numerous awards, which you can Google and look up for yourself so that we can spend more time in conversation. And most important, though, that I know you would want me to mention is that you were married to the late James Frederick Hines, and your sons are Pastor James, Rick F. Hines Jr.,
Pastor James,
who, of blessed memory, died in 2013, and Sean Hines, who lives in Rhode Island.
Now he's living in Connecticut.
Oh, okay, great. So let's start from the beginning because I have to excuse myself. I get very dry throat.
I don't know if your mic.
My mic is not on. It's on, but maybe it's on. Okay, thank you.
Let's let the audience know a little bit more about you before we get to the topics of relevance of what's going on in the community and in the nation at large about anti-Semitism and affairs concerning the Black community. Tell us a little bit more about where you were born, where you spent your school and teenage years, and your experiences in those years as a young African-American woman here in Miami. Tell us about those times, because I wasn't living here during those years.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. As you said, it's been a long time coming. And I don't know when Miriam and I met. It's just like I've known her all my life. That's the way I feel about her.
We're sisters.
We're sisters and two white-haired sisters. And I'm so happy to be here. But as she told you, I was born in Williston, Florida, and I know maybe you don't even know where that is. It's about 9 miles south of Gainesville. And it's a little rural town. And back in the 80s, when I did a story, and I mentioned that I was from Williston, and my editor wanted to know what the population was. And when I left there at 5 years old, it was 2,500. And at that time, I think it was like 1981, it was still 2,500 people. But that's how small it is. But I have people on my dad's side who live there, and my cousins. I have a few cousins who still, and I'm in touch with them. But my mom left an abusive marriage when I was 5, and she was 24 years old, and my brother was 2. And but my dad was abusive to her, but I never remember him even laying a finger on us. He was good to us, but for some reason he was mean to my mom. And it only happened when he was drinking. Alcohol has a terrible effect on a lot of people. But anyway, my mother was a housewife, and what she did, that I never forget the morning we left Williston. I was only 5 years old, but it's etched in my memory. And when I told my mother this story, she thought someone had told it to me because she didn't think that I would have remembered the details of that morning. But I always got up with my dad to drink coffee with him in the morning. Even though I was a little girl, he would sit me on his lap at the breakfast table and pour coffee in a saucer, and I would drink it from the saucer. And that particular morning was no different. But my mother had been planning. Let me tell you, there's nothing like a strong woman. I'm not saying a strong black woman, I'm saying a strong woman. She decided at a young age that she wouldn't raise her children in that kind of atmosphere. And so she and Mud Deer, yes, we had a real Mud Deer, not Tyler Perry's, and he didn't invent that. We called Mother Deer, was what her daughter called her, but we called her Mud Deer. And she was like a mother or a big sister to my mother. And they plotted how she was going to get away from that marriage. And what Mud Deer knew everybody. My mother was a newcomer to the area. And she got a man who worked in the lumber fields, who drove a lumber truck. And she made arrangements with him to pick us up after my dad left for work that morning and take us to the bus station so we could get away from Williston, Florida. And I remember that morning so well. That whole week, my mother had been washing and ironing. And she was packing our trunk, but I didn't know it was to get away. And then she would hang my dad's clothes in the closet. So that morning, when he got through eating breakfast and it was time for his ride to pick him up to go to work, she kissed him at the door. I'll never forget that, kissing my dad goodbye. He never knew that was the last kiss he was going to get from my mother. And she swirled around. She was a tall woman and very shapely, a pretty woman. She swirled around and she grabbed me, and Mud saw that truck pull off. When that truck turned the corner with my dad on the back, Mud Deer came over and she got me and combed my hair and put my bow on while my mother dressed my little baby brother. And by the time the lumber truck got in front of our door, we were dressed. And I'll never forget, that man was so strong. He took that trunk that our clothes and stuff was packed in and slung it up on the back of the truck. And then he took me and lifted me up into the cab. And Mud Deer held my brother until he helped my mother up into the cab of the truck. And then Mud Deer handed my brother to my mother, and they were crying and saying goodbye. And that was my last day in Williston, Florida, until I was 21 years old. I didn't go back again until I was 21, married and a mother of my first son. And so, but I always say, when I say my prayers to this day, I thank God for giving me the kind of mother that I had, because Mama was young and pretty, and she could have left us with my dad and his folk to raise us, but she didn't. She took us with her and didn't have a penny. She took us first to her sister, who had 5 children of her own in Palatka, Florida, and we stayed there until my mother found a job here in Miami, Florida. And her first job was at the Southern Furniture Store that was on Northwest 2nd Avenue and 9th Street in Overtown. Now there's a nice apartment built. Well, no, now there's just a vacancy, and this parking lot for the historic Lyrics Theater. But our first home was at Northwest 135. I never forget the address. I'm almost 84 now, and I still remember my first address in Miami was 135 Northwest 9th Street. And it was a nice big house, 3 stories, that the family, it was a brother and sister who owned it, and they were mulattoes. Their father was white, and he gave them that property, and it had, and in those days, they couldn't live in Whitetown, although they looked white. And the property was beautiful. They had a tennis court on there, and is this you play with you hit the ball in the croquet, and it had places to play croquet, and then they had this big front porch, and on either side of the great big steps there was two big bowls of ferns and rocking chairs. And we lived on the 3rd floor. The family, the brother and sister, had turned this mansion into a rooming house. So that's where my mother lived. And we had a big room on the 3rd floor that was right next to the bathroom. And we used to, Miss Nellie, that was her name, Miss Watkins, she didn't want us sliding down the banisters. Big mahogany, beautiful banisters. We delighted in doing that. We would slide down those banisters when she wasn't around. My mother would be so upset with us when she found out that we did that. But anyway, that's where our first home was. And then when we came to Miami in 1944, in April of 1944, when I had just turned 6 years old. And so my mother it was a perfect setup because she could watch us in the summertime from the windows of the store, and she would come at lunchtime and take care of us and feed us and go back to work. It was just right across the street, and so it was a perfect setup. And so my brother and I went to Miss Powell's private school. She was a black woman, a wonderful woman, who had a private school, and our house faced the court, and she was like on the left side of 9th Street on the court. And she had a wonderful school, and I can see Miss Powers playing that old upright piano right now, banging on it and missing keys and notes, and we were singing songs, to the music. And she was just so sweet. I loved her. And I had to go to her school because when I started, school had already started when we moved here, and so they wouldn't accept me because it was already April. So I was enrolled in Miss Powers' school, and when school opened in September, I went to Douglas Primary School, which is still there at 13th Street. And
you had mentioned the phrase "White Town."
Yes,
is that what this part of Miami?
We used to call it the Overtown area now that we know as Overtown, and I'll tell you a little story about getting that name on the map. But when we came here from Palatka and lived with my mother, it was called the Central Negro District by white people.
Here in Miami?
Here in Miami. It was, if you get some old copies of the Miami Herald prior to 1970, when I started writing and insisted that the area be called Overtown in the paper, that's when they started calling it Overtown. But before then, it was called the Central Negro District, or Colored Town.
Really?
Yes. And we lived, the house where we lived on 9th Street was just walking distance from the railroad tracks. And we walked downtown. And of course, in those days, everybody dressed up, even the little black children. We dressed up to go to town. We couldn't try on shoes. We couldn't try on clothes. But there was a shoe store behind Bea Hines that Ray something. He had it was a Jewish man who owned that store.
Was that your first relationship or with a Jewish family or the Jewish people in our community?
No, I'm going to tell you who the first. Mama left Southern Furniture Store and got a job with a wonderful woman named Ethel Goldstein. And Ethel Goldstein was like a mother to my mom. She taught my mother. My mother's mother married when she was 13, so there was a lot of stuff she didn't know to tell her daughters. And Mrs. Goldstein taught my mother everything that a mother would teach her daughter.
And who was Mrs. Goldstein?
And I'm going to tell you, Mrs. Goldstein was just...
I'm just so anxious to hear about it.
And I'm anxious to tell you. Mrs. Goldstein was a wonderful woman whose daughter was ill, and she was raising her grandchildren. And when she hired my mother, and she knew that my mother had two children, whenever we had to sleep, my mother had to spend the night over because she had to go out and was out late, and bus service was terrible back then. So she would say, "Ida Bell, bring the children," and she would put mattresses in the family room, and all of us, the little white children, the little Jewish children, all of us slept together. And on the mattresses in the Florida room, and we just had the best time. And so when I was, let me see, was I 9? I was about 8 or 9 when my mother married again, and she married a wonderful man who was a sailor, and he was in the service, World War II. He was serving in the army as a sailor, and he learned a trade as a chef. And that's why I love to cook, because of him. My mother never liked to cook, but he loved to cook, and that was what he did for a living. So he told me that it was an art, and I believed him. And now people are using it as an art, but back then they didn't say that. You were just a cook. But anyway, he taught me the love of cooking. But anyway, when my mother married him, that's when she left Mrs. Goldstein, and we moved to Texas for a year. So but Mama didn't like the weather out there. She didn't like the tornadoes. She didn't like the floods, because that's what happened the year we were there. They had tornadoes and floods, and she said, if I ever get back, and cold weather. First time we ever saw snow and ice on the ground, and my mother cried every day going to work because she was falling, slipping on the ice. She said, if I ever get back to Miami, I'm never leaving again, and she didn't. But anyway, my stepdad bought a nice little house in an area that they had built for returning black veterans, in those days, like Bunch Park here in Miami and Richmond Heights, they did for black veterans coming from the war in World War II. And we would just loved it. My brother and I were just so happy. But my mother, of course, wasn't. And so my stepdad said, okay, well, he came back first to Miami to get a job, and he told her to sell the house and follow him, and that's what she did. And so then we came back and settled in Liberty City. And I went to Liberty City Elementary in the 6th grade. In 1949, we came back to Miami, and that fall I entered it was a new school, never had been used before, and it was right next door to Dorsey High School. And so that's where I went to school in the 6th grade. And then in the 7th grade, by the 7th grade, my mother and my stepfather had separated and went their separate ways. He went to New Jersey, and he had a beautiful handwriting, and I remember him writing my mother. I sneaked and read the letter. Please come to New Jersey. We could have a better life, but my mother didn't want to leave Miami, and she decided not to. And so but he was the kind of man who encouraged my drawing. He encouraged my singing. When I was in the 3rd grade, I was singing the aria from Porgy and Bess, Summertime. He taught me to sing that. And I remember in those days, our teachers used to have little talent shows in the classroom to see where the children were and what they could do. And I would always sing Summertime, and they would always be so shocked. How do you know about this song? How do you know about this? This is an opera. But my stepdad taught me that. And he bought me a camera. I was the only child in the 4th grade with a camera taking pictures of my classmates. And he would tell my brother and I what great children we were. And these are my kids, everybody. That's what he called it. These are my kids. And we were so heartbroken when they broke up. We just loved him. And long story short, when I became a reporter in 1970, one of the first things I did, I wrote about, they wanted me. They asked me, one of the editors at the Herald asked me, because I had worked at the Herald for 4 years as a file clerk before I became a reporter. I was going to school at night and working in the day, and sometimes I went to school in the day and worked at night. And that's how I met Fred Shaw, the late, great Fred Shaw. Do you recognize that name? Fred Shaw was the vice president of development of the Miami-Dade Community College at the time, but he was also the Miami Herald's book editor. Mm-hmm. And we became friends on the nights that I worked there. And so when I had a paper to turn in, I would ask him to read it. And one night, after he finished reading a paper, he said, "Bea, what is your major?" And I told him I was studying to become a teacher. I wanted to be an art teacher. And he said, "No, you should change your major to journalism." And so I laughed. I said, but I'm black. They're not going to hire me. And he said, he was so serious, I'll never forget it. He said, B, things are changing, and you need to be ready for the change. And I stopped everything when I registered again for my classes. I had my journalism as my major, and he told me Barbara Garfunkel, the late sweet Barbara Garfunkel, taught journalism at Miami-Dade, and he said, you need to get in her class. And I did. And so when he was so proud of me, he lived to see me become a reporter. And the next thing he said, the first big story I wrote, he said, this is a chapter in your book. Oh, Fred, I'm sorry, I haven't written the book yet. I haven't finished it yet, but I hope I do before I leave this earth. But he said, this is going to be a chapter in your book. And then early in 1971, I came in on a Sunday to pick something up with my children, and one of the young men who was doing obituaries, he said, B, I'm so sorry to be the one to tell you this, but your good friend Fred just passed today. And I nearly fainted. I was just it was like somebody in my family had died, and I love him to this day. That's how close we were. And so as I went on, when I became, I'm kind of skipping because there's so much to tell, but I wanted to tell you about my growing up years as a teenager.
Yeah.
Because you asked about that. In the years that I was growing up in Miami and a student at Booker T. Washington High School, we had a principal by the name of Charles L. Williams. And whenever black entertainers or opera singers or whoever would come to town, we could not go to see them because they were either performing at Dade County Auditorium or on the beach or somewhere. We couldn't see them. But he made arrangements for them to come to Booker T. And so we never missed out on very much. And then as I got older, and in those days, we used to, our favorite pastime was going dancing. And there was so much talent in the black community. There were live bands everywhere you went. And I mean, excellent bands, excellent musicians. So on Monday nights and on Sunday afternoons, they would have the jam sessions at the Sir John Hotel.
Sir John?
The Sir John Hotel.
Was that here on the
That
beach?
that was a black hotel on 2nd Avenue, and a block north of there was the Mary Elizabeth Hotel. Both really nice hotels. And so black entertainers who came to perform here had to stay at one of those hotels. And then later on the Carver Hotel was built. But the Mary Elizabeth and the Sir John Hotel would have jam sessions on Sunday afternoons when they had that's where I saw Hazel Scott, who was married to the late Adam Clayton Powell Jr., and she was a jazz pianist. I got to see her. I got to see what's this one? What a Difference a Day Make. You would, if I could think of her name right now, but I can't.
I can't help it.
Anyway,
Bea, I don't want to interrupt, but
please,
I really want to
rattle
get
on
to
and on.
something that I think our audience is interested in,
Mm-hmm.
because we have a lot of young people watching today,
Mm-hmm.
and you used the phrase that you couldn't come to see
Right.
these entertainers. So
Mm-hmm.
tell us about the discrimination against
Yes.
blacks on Miami Beach, which is where you're sitting now being
Right.
interviewed.
Well, it was not only on Miami Beach. We had to have, a lot of Jews couldn't go to some of the country clubs and stuff here. Well, so now you know what it was like for blacks. We had to have identification tags if we worked on the beach. Well, when I was a maid, and I worked as a maid for 3 years before I went to the Miami Herald as a file clerk. And I had my own private protest going. I said, and my friends who we carpool, and they said, you need to get your ID because if they stop you, you're going to be in trouble, blah, blah, blah. I said, I'm not doing that. I am not going to get an ID. I know who I am. I'm not going to get an ID to ride over here to clean somebody's house and to go back. I wasn't going to do that. And that was my own private protest. I never got an ID. My mother had one. Everybody else I knew who worked over on Miami Beach had one. But I didn't realize how bad discrimination was until I graduated high school. And that summer I got a job at Bea Hines as a maid. But one thing I can say about the Bea Hines family, they had separate facilities. You could try on a dress in Bea Hines. A lot of black people didn't know that, but we had separate fitting rooms for black people. And and I knew because I worked there and I cleaned them, with the little broom and the little dustpan and everything, kept things clean. But I didn't really know how bad it was until I graduated and I was working there. But Mr. Bea Hines would not allow the people who worked there to, if they showed any type of discrimination, they would be fired if they did. And I'll never forget that. And so they had to be nice, the people who worked there, even though they didn't want to, we had our separate cafeteria where we ate the same good food, but it was separate. And so that's when I realized as a young adult, now I'm 18, I'm going out into the world, and I know that we were sheltered for as long as I was in school. We had our own life. We had our own Easter parade on Sunday on 2nd Avenue. It was like Little Broadway or 5th Avenue in New York. And it was wonderful. We had a wonderful life. We didn't know. Our parents and our teachers had shielded us from all the trauma that they were going through so that we could have a wonderful life.
That's really interesting. For the audience, particularly the young people who are watching today from the classrooms, Macy's is now what Bea Hines was. Bea Hines was the original Florida department store.
And then came Jordan Marsh.
Jordan Marsh. May I skip now
Sure, yes.
I read a quote that you said, and I wanted you to explain this, and then that'll lead us into today's events. You say that when you became the first African-American woman to join the Miami Herald staff, in a recent interview, you said, quote, you felt that you were carrying a burden for the black people.
Yes.
To become that writer. Would you explain that?
Yes, because prior to my joining the paper as a reporter, we had a couple of other reporters, black men, who did not stay very long. One man was Granville Reed, who left to go to, he was the second black person hired as a reporter by the Miami Herald. And he left to become, as I understand, a reporter for a Tampa television station. And then the other person was my dear friend and the brother of Congresswoman Frederica Wilson. His name was Thurlee Smith, and we were friends from the 6th grade. And Thurlee he was actually a teacher, but they needed so badly black reporters that Garth Reeves got connected with our managing editor and got him hired as the first.
Who was that?
Thurlee Smith.
Oh, I worked with him.
Yes, he was
He became a African-American specialist.
That's right.
On my staff.
At the Miami-Dade School Board.
Yeah,
that's
I worked with Thurlee for years.
Yes, and many people didn't know about Thurlee.
No, I didn't know that he was a reporter before
Yes,
that.
and so when I became, when the In the Company of Women tapped me in 1994, they were introducing me as the first black reporter, and his sister and I were tapped the same time, that same year. And Thurlee was in the audience, and it was my chance to give him the honor. And when they asked me to say something, I let them know that I was not the first black reporter. And I said, my friend Thurlee, would you please stand? And he was just so touched that I would do that. And so that now the Herald, since then, the Herald named a scholarship in his honor. One year he had a scholarship named in his honor. But what was your question again? Grandma. And there's so much I want to tell you guys.
Can you imagine? We're going to have lunch later, the two of us. They'll probably be closing the restaurant while we're still talking. So I'm going to repeat the question, but then I have another one that I want to get to. So the question was that you felt as an African-American woman.
Got it.
That it's sort of the way I feel as a Holocaust educator, that as a Jewish woman, I have the commitment and the responsibility to educate the world, the community, about my culture. So when you said, as a black woman, when you got your opportunity to write for the Miami Herald, that you had a burden and a
I did.
responsibility to represent the black culture and the black people?
Because first of all, you got to understand, black women were referred to in the paper by her first name. When they referred to white women, it was Mrs. Jones or Mrs. Robinson or whatever. But my mother, for instance, would have been Ida Bell, and I would have been Beatrice or B. So that was one of the things I wrote so many memos to the editors that I thought I was going to get fired one time. And one time I can't remember what memo this was, I wrote about some discrimination in the newspaper that I thought they should take care of. And the city editor called me into his office. And so before I went to his office, I started clearing my desk because I thought he was going to fire me. Well, as it turned out, he didn't fire me. He gave me a raise. And his name was Steve Rogers, and Steve Rogers was a kind of man who would listen to me. And when the paper was, and the reason I felt the burden is because our story had never been truly told. Nobody really knew who I was or who the black people were in the community. We nursed babies, white babies, but nobody took the time to know us. And so I needed to tell our story. I felt the burden. If I saw something wrong, I remember when Haiti, when Papa Baby Doc was going in over there and causing all kind of problems, there was a Haitian woman who was like about to deliver, laying in the street with her belly exposed, and she was screaming. And they took a picture and ran it on the front page. And I was so hurt over that. I thought that was so disrespectful. And I went to the editor, one of the editors, and I told him, I said, that was a picture that never should have been run. We could have, there was a man who, I can't remember, it was an old World War II veteran, was saluting one time and his pants fell down. And DiPiani, one of our famous photographers, took the picture. They never ran it. They did not run it out of respect for that dear old man, and I felt really bad about that woman. And so this was a woman editor who said to me, "Well, I ran it by somebody else, and they didn't see anything wrong with it." And so I knew that I had a lot of work to do, because if another woman didn't see the horror of that picture and how disrespectful it was, how could we expect a man editor to to see?
Good for you. Tell me something, Bea. When was it, and what triggered it, that in your column, which you still write, and you're very active in it, and I feel good about that, being that we're the same age. So when people start saying, like, when are you going to hang it up, Miriam? I say, hey, look, if Bea Hines can still be writing, I'm still going to be doing what I do. So you hang in there, lady.
I'll let you know when I decide it's time to hang up, and then you could hang up your hat.
The two of us
we'll do it at the same time.
When was it that?
Thank you.
When was it when you first started including information about what was happening in the Jewish community? Because it's pretty well known in Miami, Broward, and so forth, that if you're a Jewish organization and you want mention of your work, that contact Bea Hines.
Well, what happened is, one of my early assignments, after they got through sending me on wild goose chases and stuff like that, and sending me to the dump where there was no story, and I went to the same Steve Rogers and I said, I have 2 little boys and I need to keep this job, and they're playing games with me. And he said, well, Bea, what do you want us to do? I said, I want you to give me the opportunity to tell our story. That's how we started talking about black people in the paper. And then after they assigned me with Adon Taft. Remember Adon Taft? He used to be the religion editor.
Yes.
Fine man. And so Adon and I covered religion together. And I didn't know, the first thing I knew about Jewish people, but I didn't know about the religion. And the rabbi who used to be the rabbi at the on Fifth over near the I can't think of his name right now. But anyway, it'll come back to me. He gave me my first book on Judaism. and it taught me the rituals and stuff like that. And so I was able to write intelligently about it. But I had always, as I said, I always had a love for Jewish people because, and my editors asked me one time, why didn't I feel bitter? I'd gone through so much as a maid, but why didn't I feel bitter? And I said, because I know that not all white people are the same. And I told them about Mrs. Goldstein, and they said, well, why don't you write us a little story? And I wrote about Ethel Goldstein and what she did, what she meant to us. I had not seen her since I was 10 years old, and I'm 32 now when I wrote this story. And I couldn't remember her first name, so I called my mother. I said, Mama, what was Mrs. Goldstein's first name? And she said, Ethel. And I finished the story, and the next day, my phone was blowing up. Ethel was calling so many times, and finally I picked up the phone, and she said, Beatrice, this is Ethel Goldstein. That's how she talked. I nearly screamed. I was so happy to hear her voice. And she said, and how is Ida Bell? And I told her where we live. I'm living in the house. We had just moved in the house where I'm living now. It's my mother's house. I moved back when she got sick, and I stayed there. But I told her the address, and the next day, she was about 88 at the time. She drove all the way from Coral Gables to where I live now, to see my mother. And what a reunion that was. And that's how you want to know about Ethel Goldstein. That was how. And since she has passed on many years ago, her grandchildren that I grew up with when we were little, we are still in touch. And one of the granddaughters, you might know this name, is Taffy Gould.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Taffy she and her family members started a scholarship fund for my family's children and the children of my church. And to this date, they have given nearly $1 million to children in our church and in my family to finish their college education.
What a beautiful,
yes.
beautiful story
yes.
of interculture,
yes.
interfaith.
And that's how you get to know people.
Yeah.
You know, I slept on the mattresses on the floor with those children when we were little, so I got to know them. Oh, and the other thing you need to know what Mrs. Goldstein taught me. She used to make the best tuna fish salad sandwiches. And I never used to eat cheese, and she would put a slice of Swiss cheese on it. I don't want a tuna fish sandwich today unless it's got a slice of Swiss cheese on it. Ethel Goldstein taught me that.
She didn't teach you how to bake a challah?
No, she didn't, because I wasn't around that long. I wasn't around that long. But my other Jewish friends taught me. I haven't baked the challah yet, but I know how to make matzo ball soup.
Oh, do you?
Oh, yes, I do.
Well, you're ahead of me because I still haven't figured out how to get those matzo balls right.
Oh, yes. I can do that, and I love to do it. I love matzo ball soup.
Well, I understand that you have a Passover every year with our friend Gail Harris.
I do. I love Gail like a sister, like I love you. She is so sweet, and I don't even know how we met either. It's a funny thing about friendship. When you love your friends and you've been friends for a while, you don't even know when you met. It's just sort of, we just got together.
So let's get to some very important things that you and I want to talk about before our time is up.
Oh my goodness.
We want to give an opportunity for Q&A.
Okay.
I think there's going to be a part 2 to this program.
I hope so, because there's so much. My story is like part 1 and 2 and 3 and 4.
On your Sunday, December 26th article, you wrote, quote, "Let's remember our full history, including racial injustices." And you were referring to this CRT, critical race theory, that many people out there don't even really know what it means.
No, they don't.
So would you please explain the concept of critical race theory and why it is so ridiculously unnecessary to even be an issue in our public schools, and how you, as an African-American woman, feel about the concept of not telling the full story because of the concern of certain groups of people, but feeling uncomfortable hearing about the African-American experience.
Well, first of all, as I understand it, critical race theory is not even taught in our elementary and secondary schools. It's only taught in colleges. But when I was growing up, we didn't have, the only thing I knew about our history, our black history, was that was in our social studies books. It was a little chapter about colonial times, and they mentioned slaves. Never mentioned what they went through. I was fortunate, and I always say I'm fortunate to have grown up in an era when I had teachers like the late Eunice Liberty, who we used to, whenever there was an African person visiting this area, she would make sure we got them at the school. And at that time, I was at Douglas Primary School in the third grade, and she wanted us to know our history. And so she would dig, and not only Eunice Liberty, but other teachers. They would dig and they would tell us what was not in the history books. They taught us. They taught us our history. They researched it and they looked it up. And so the vast majority of America didn't really know our history until Roots, when Alex Haley, when he wrote Roots. And I'll never forget, I had asked when I read the book, and I asked my editor at the time, why wouldn't we should have a we used to do serial parts, like part, what do you call it, serial? Yes, of the book. And she wouldn't do it. Later on, they did it after it got to be a big thing on television. She did it, but I had read Roots, and I thought this would be the community needs to know about this. But then when the Roots came on, I made my children, every night that it came on, they couldn't go to a basketball, whatever was going on, unless it was necessary at school. They had to sit there, and we watched it together as a family. Sometimes I would have to run out of the living room in tears because I couldn't stand to see the torture and the stuff that was going on. But we watched it as a family, and that's when the vast majority, I think, of this community, I know of Miami, realized what slavery had done to black people. And I used to always tell my friends from other places like the Bahamas and Jamaica, you notice they have a different kind of attitude about life than American blacks who came here from rural areas to Miami. And I used to tell them, I say, you are the way you are because nobody ever told you weren't good enough. You came from a black Caribbean country. You were in charge. You had black leaders. And so you always felt good about yourself. But when you have been told for centuries that you're not good enough and that you are nobody, you've got to fight extra hard. You've got to tell yourself. When I was a maid, I worked for a woman who used to put out a cracked dish, a plate that had a dirty crack in it, and a cup with the same kind of dirty crack, and tarnished silverware, and that was what I must use to eat my lunch. And I beg to differ, I did not. What I did, because she was never there, she was a career woman, when I ate my lunch, I got her nice dishes, and I got me her nice silverware. And I did that because I'm telling myself, you are somebody. You are somebody. You have got to tell yourself that. And then when my children came along, I told them, you are somebody. You are special. You can do this and you can do that. I didn't know that I was ever going to become a reporter. And my mother, if I had told her that I was studying journalism, she wouldn't have kept my babies for me when I went to school at night, because she never saw a black reporter. And she was so worried. She didn't let me take a scholarship in voice because she thought I could be an opera singer. And so she would not let me take the scholarship. She didn't realize that I could use that scholarship, but I could do other things. She did not realize it. But anyway, so you have to tell yourself over and over, and I do that to this day, that I am somebody, because I grew up in an era when black people were not somebodies. We were not taught about the people who did all these inventions, these black people, the man who invented the red lights, the traffic lights. I was a grown woman when I knew that. Our teachers did a good job of telling us what they had researched, but there was so much to the story that they could never tell us everything in our youth. So I had to continue learning and finding out the story as I got older. And then I have to pass it on to my children and my great-grandchildren, which I'm doing now. So it's a cycle that you have to keep going. You can't stop.
You're so inspirational.
I'm sorry. the children, right. There was a little after Black History became Black History Week became Black History Month. Some schools started having curriculum based on Black history, and so it was taught, but they left it at the discretion of the teachers in the schools. Many times they were not. You didn't have to do that curriculum.
Well, today it's a mandate.
Yeah.
It's a state law that you must teach the history of the Holocaust and the African American history, and the two groups brought it to the legislature together.
Yes.
Doris Bendigal from the school board.
Dorothy.
So Dorothy, I'm sorry, Dorothy.
It's okay.
So now it's a mandate. So I just want to finish up with
Go ahead.
one last thing, and then we're going to open it to the audience. Thank you for your very, very inspiring words. We're approaching almost the end of an hour, which is usually how long we're on. On your January 2nd article, you said something so beautiful. I wrote it down. You said, in this brand new year, let's forget the past slights and bring in joy. And the phrases there was a cloud of words on the Miami Herald page, and the words that were on there were charity, justice, hope, faith, forgive, life, and love. And I think you embody all of those, and that's why we all love you so much, and why you're still doing what you do.
Thank you.
And why the Jewish community so respects and admires and loves you. I thank you for everything, and I'm so fortunate to be your friend.
Thank you.
And I'm going to take you to the Jewish deli on 41st Street when we're done, and we're going to have hot dogs for me, or
Whatever,
maybe
I don't know.
perhaps a hot pastrami sandwich, which is my favorite.
Yeah, I
over
like
there,
pastrami too.
and whatever it is that you want. So with that, I'm going to end the interview part, and certainly open it up to first questions from our audience that Debbie, our staff person, might want to facilitate.
Okay.
Rather than take a mic, we're not going to pass them around. If you raise your hand, we'll call you.
If you, Debbie, if you don't mind, could you take off your mask so you can repeat the question? You've all sat here so beautifully,
And
so
thank you.
intent.
Thank you so
How
much.
could you not? I mean, this woman is a real storyteller.
So many emotions just sitting and listening. I almost cried at least
Oh,
once.
bless you.
Yes, and I've lived in Miami. I'll ask the first question. I've lived in Miami since 1967, and so I grew up. And I was one of the teachers in 1971 when they moved a lot of teachers around, some voluntarily and some
Right.
to balance the school system. And the idea was to match the ratio. If you all don't know this, what they did in the public schools of Dade County, the whole county, was whatever percentage, I think it was 19% of the population of Dade County was African American. And so all the elementary school, all the school children, they moved children to get as close as they could so every school would be integrated. And they moved the teachers.
They did.
I don't know if that was this, I think the kids moved the year before.
I think the teachers moved first.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
Well,
uh-huh.
But this is what I wanted to share with you, and then we'll open it to
Can the audience hear you out there and the virtual without a mic? Yeah?
He said
Okay.
yes.
I'm not quiet. No, the year that I moved, there were 7 elementary schools, or 7 schools in Dade County that they did not integrate because they were like a core. And I think it was in Brownsville. I was at Floral Heights. But those 7 schools, they could not integrate because as they bused people, they did it from the outside.
Yeah, they bust. That was my first year as a reporter in '70 when they bust people in from Hialeah to
Right.
Brownsville, and it was a big fight.
So in my
Big fight.
school and a number of the other schools, 6 other schools in my area, the teachers were integrated to the correct proportion. But we had, in the elementary school that I was in, there was only one white child, and she was the child of a teacher who brought her with her. And so I wondered, from your viewpoint looking, how did you feel about that integration?
Well, I thought integration would serve us well. I just felt I was, I'm an optimist, and I just thought it would serve us all well. We would all do better. We would all get the same education and everything. I had no idea it was going to be the fight that it was. And actually, it was 71, I think, when they bused the children from Hialeah to Brownsville. And I was on the education beat at the time. And my son, Ricky, was one of the children bused, not from Hialeah, but he was assigned to Brownsville from where we lived, and so I was over there a lot doing stories, and I made friends with a lot of those parents who didn't want their children to come to Brownsville. We became friends, and now they've all disappeared from the face of the earth. I don't know where they are now. I have no idea where they are.
Anyone else?
I like some mixed questions.
Mm-hmm.
One, I'm curious as to what the African American population or percentage is now in Miami, and also if the immigration of all the Latin Americans and the Haitians and the Central America, like there are so many other communities of color, various communities, I should
Right.
just say, that aren't African American. How has that changed what the African American community is striving for, and how do they integrate together? And I'm just wondering how that has altered the community and, the goal.
Well, I think the goals are the same, to reach equality, no matter where, if you came from the Bahamas or at first when we came here, we didn't have the first Haitian person I saw in Miami I was in high school, and the guy who that we all had a crush on was a young Haitian man. His last name was Fortune. Emile Fortune was his name, and his daddy had come over here and had a tailor shop on 54th Street, and that was the first and the only Haitian that I knew. And this was in the 50s. So his goals, their goals were the same as ours. He knew he was black and couldn't go to Miami Beach High School or Miami High School. He had to go to Booker T. Washington High School. But as the years passed on, and more people, actually the Bahamian people and the black people from places like North Carolina and Georgia and rural areas of the South, they came together and became they became like family. Many of the Bahamian settlers settled in Coconut Grove first, but when we came here in 1944, my mother's surrogate family were Bahamian people who took her in as their daughter, the Rogers, Mrs. Rogers, and Mrs. Rogers' daughter, Doris, was my mother's sister, so to speak. And their children, Doris's children, her oldest child now she will be 88 this year, and we're still friends. And so our goals were the same, but as the years went on, things, the Bahamian people they had their own Bahamian Federation and that kind of thing. And I don't blame them for wanting to keep their roots from the Bahamas. But whenever we would have the NAACP meetings, they would be members of that. So that let us know that their goals were the same as ours. They just wanted to keep their culture. And the same thing happened with the Jamaican people when they started coming over. Their goals were the same as ours, to have equality, but they still wanted to keep their culture. Who can blame a person? I like to keep my culture from Williston and from the country. We have different foods that we eat, and I've taught all my Jamaican friends and my Bahamian friends how to cook certain things that we cook that's different from and they've taught me how to cook different things. So the goals were the same, but we wanted to keep our cultures, and it wasn't always easy to do that. But to show you how much black Americans, African Americans who came from the rural South and who was direct descendants from slaves, to show you how much we loved and wanted to be a part of and wanted to help people of all races achieve their equality, was when the Haitians started coming over. And we marched. I remember I marched. I guess they would have fired me if they had known I was marching And that march to the courthouse with all those thousands of black people marching that day to get Haitians to be able to come over here and live freely and to experience the culture and the freedom that they were starving and dying and eating dirt in Haiti. They needed to come to a place where they could be free and to get help. And we marched. I can't tell you the number of black Americans that I know who marched with them. Our goals are the same, but we want to keep our culture. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with you being Jewish, wanting to keep your culture, but we have the same goals. Same goals. And I love that. Now, not everybody is that way. There are some people in every group who they're just going to hate anyhow. That's just what they do. They just hate. But we don't have to do that. I have a
quote here that I've written down all your quotes. You said in a recent interview, we may be a different color of skin, a different culture, but we're really all the same.
That's right. And I believe that. Go ahead. It is. Mm-hmm.
It is not valid, it is not accepted by everybody. And unfortunately, sometimes it is even like racism, like division between groups of people are even fomented by people that have the power to do so. What can people like us, everyday people, what would your suggestion be? Because you have a power with your writing.
Right.
What can any of us do to try to counteract all those negative energies, those negative attitudes that are all over?
I always believe. Go ahead.
I've been asked, so people at home aren't able to hear.
Oh,
I've been asked to repeat her question.
Okay.
And or if you could repeat.
Okay, I think I can repeat it. She wants to know what can we do to make things better for our children and for other people. I believe that's the gist of what you wanted.
Specifically because of the divisiveness
Right.
that we're having right now.
Yes, and right. That's and all I can, and I said this in several columns. Each one reach one. We take each one. I can't tell the masses go out and meet people and go to church with them and go to the synagogue, but I can meet one person. Miriam and I met, and so together we have made things better for many people around us because we have met and we have seen eye to eye and we understand what our culture has gone through. So you have to do that. You have to sit down, break bread with a Muslim, and I said this in, I think, one of my last columns. Go to church with a Catholic person. I've been to synagogue. How can you go to a synagogue and hear those beautiful stories and from the Torah and that beautiful music and not feel the heart of the person who brought you there? You got to do that. It's an individual thing. I am not the president of this country, and if I can't tell you what to do, I can only suggest that try to reach out to somebody who is different from you. Teach your children that these people may be different, but we're all pretty much alike. They may believe this way, and that's why I like so much Anita Mindback, her program, her project, building bridges, and that's what they're teaching the children to do in school, to reach out to other children who are different from you and get to know them. And it starts with the children. It really does. It starts with the children. If we teach our children to be tolerant and understanding and to get to know, they will pass it on to somebody. Some of their friends will pick up on it. Not everybody. There's always going to be a bully somewhere. We know that. But
I am very concerned about right now, today. What can the community do to let our voices be heard very strongly in the state and nationally about the book banning? There, not only,
we can write letters.
Forget about the fact that the Mouse book of Holocaust was just banned. beautiful bluest
Eyes, yes.
And I saw yesterday that even
Michelle Obama's book.
Michelle Obama's book. I
Yeah.
mean, come on, are we just going to sit by
We
and let
can't.
this
We
happen?
have to write letters. We have to call our Congress people and let them know that we are not going to stand for this. I try to use my column as much as possible to speak out against such things as that. And we need to we don't fight with carnal weapons, with guns and stuff. But we can fight with the pen, and we can pick up the phone, and we could call, and we could sign petitions, and somebody's going to take heed when we do those things. If you keep calling your congressman enough about something, he's going to listen after a while, or she will listen.
It's called spiritual resistance.
That's right.
Question from someone at home.
Okay.
Oh, good.
In your opinion, what is the most pressing issue affecting community relations here in Miami?
It is a good, and I think the most pressing problem, you say? Issue is the fact that we can't seem to get together. That's it. We can't even decide whether or not to take the shot or to wear a mask. That's the problem. You know, we listen to, instead of trying to research and find out what is really going on, we listen to people who don't know anything, and they put it on Facebook and they put it on Instagram, and so we run after that. But I am a child of the polio era, okay? And when they said we had to take those shots, there was no question we took those shots. And now you rarely hear of anybody getting polio, and if they do, they don't die.
When I was a teacher, all the years I was also a polio child, but when I was a teacher, children were not allowed to come into the school, to the classroom every year unless they had the paper with all of their shots.
That's right.
And I can remember a couple of years where we had a child who hadn't had the shots, and we called the parent, oh, we didn't get to, we'll do it. Your child cannot come into our classroom.
That's right.
With other children. And every child, and if you were the one of 5,000, one child who the parents wouldn't do it, they had to either homeschool or find a very small little private school that would take them. And you know what? I had measles, mumps, and chickenpox when I was a child.
I did too.
None of the children today, my grandchildren,
They don't have it.
What's that?
They don't even know what that is.
And it's because we all had smallpox vaccination.
We got all those shots after we had the measles and the mumps and the chicken
I
pox.
was rolling up my sleeve because I wanted to show you, but I can't get that far.
Yeah.
That I wasn't allowed to enter America as a refugee escaping the Holocaust without 3 vaccinations that I have in my upper right arm, big vaccinations.
Yeah.
So I don't get it. I really
Yeah.
don't.
So
I don't get it, and I'm fighting with it in myself, with myself, constantly trying to understand the other side.
we
but
never
I
will
just don't get
understand. We never will understand the other side. And then I've heard stories of where, just yesterday, one of my friends, he called me, and she was telling me about another friend of hers who passed, or somebody's friend, and had COVID. And on the way to the hospital, was begging the paramedics to give her the shots. And it's too late.
Yeah.
So maybe, I don't know what's in the high blood pressure medicine I take. I don't know what's in anything. We don't even know what's in Tylenol, to be truthful. But if we get a little pain, don't we take a little Tylenol?
That's right.
We do.
Yeah.
So this, almost 1 million people have died, or has it been reach 1 million already, who have died of COVID? That is uncalled for. We didn't have to have this happen. And I'm making arrangements for a friend of mine now who passed, and they couldn't even have the funeral Saturday because the arranged funeral home has 5 funerals Saturday, back-to-back funerals.
Really?
And that's how it's been since COVID. They've had to put people on ice and say we can't bury them until next month because people are dying so fast.
and I do want to remind our audience that we're not hypocrites, that the people who are here are wearing masks,
You know,
and Bea and I have been
mine.
vaccinated. We have our masks.
Have been
we're socially
vaccinated.
distanced.
yes.
So if there are any more comments?
I have a comment. Doing what we're doing today.
Yes.
And more of these is one of the best things. And the
I
more
agree.
different organizations you speak with, the more different people, as we open up the JCC, we definitely should do this again.
I would love to. I would love to.
Well, you know what, Bea? I was just sitting here thinking that you're not the president. That's true. But why can't we, here in Miami, you and I, from two different cultures, start some kind of a movement
That
where
would-
we would have these kind of
conversations.
salon, as I
Yes,
call my
yeah.
programs,
Uh-huh.
conversations all over the city
I would love
with
that.
mixed ethnicities. And maybe that would be a way for us to, in some small way, make a contribution to trying to heal.
That
Because
would
we
work
are
with me.
worried. We
Yeah,
are
I am
all
worried. Yes, that would work with me.
I
Yeah,
know
that would work
I
for me.
have not been scared at all as a Jew
Hmm.
until I saw the Orlando Nazi flag,
I know.
that swastika hanging over the bridge. And I thought, okay, this has gone too far.
Yeah, and now
So-
they were threatening historically black colleges and universities with there was bomb threats. That's right. So there's crazies out there, and they know who we are. But that's okay. I have never told anybody that I'm not scared of, but I'm brave. You got to be brave. You can be scared and still be brave. You just got to do it. You just have to go. And I've never been the kind of person to say, okay, I'm so strong and brave. I like to kind of work from the background, but sometimes you got to step out of your comfort zone, and you've got to do what you have to do and say what you have to say. And sometimes people are not going to agree with you. I get a lot of hate mail.
You? I was
Oh
gonna
yeah,
ask you that.
I
Do
do. One man was so mean to me one time, and finally I said, you know what? I'm not going to even answer him because he just wants to keep an argument going. And then the last thing I said was, God bless you. And I never heard from him
That
again.
sounds like that Southern saying, bless your heart.
Bless your heart.
I know what that means.
Someone in our audience said, you need to write your book, so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So with that, I will close this session and tell you how much I love you, Bea.
I love you too. You know it.
Thank you both for being here. This was amazing, and we hope that everyone will tune in back later tonight. We have Ira Rosen, another discussion about journalism. He
Okay.
was a producer for 60 Minutes for many,
Yes,
many years.
I
and
know
all
that
the
name.
ins and outs
Okay.
from him. So that'll be tonight at 7:30.
Okay.
You can come here or tune in.
She knows. She's taught me how to Zoom. So I know how to Zoom.